my career, I'd have my 24, 25, well, first graders to begin with. Well, there were things that needed to be done at home to support what I was doing in my classroom.
Right.
So if I sent home that list of sight words to practice on, guess what they did at home? They practiced their sight words. When I sent home notes saying we need this or we need that in the classroom, guess what came back? Whatever it was I asked for. And if I had to call mom or dad, but mostly mom, to say, I'm having trouble with little Charlie, guess who really gave it to little Charlie when he got home? It was what happened at home was really almost always supportive of what was going on in the classroom.
I wish I knew how much I miss not knowing that we're all screwed.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually, it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burnt out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa Fore. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. Today I have Carol with me. She is part of a series I'm doing that showcases a family of educators. Carol has been in education for 40 years. She married an educator, and one of her 3 children went on to become an educator also. Actually, word on the street is that perhaps another of her 3 children is thinking of heading down this path as well. Carol has worked in elementary, intermediate education, as well as higher education, and in a coaching position. I'm very excited to have Carol here because her insight will be of an educator who has seen the system itself from several vantage points. Carol, thanks for agreeing to do this, and welcome.
Thank you.
So what brought you to education?
Well, when I was, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher in some capacity. It just seemed like a natural fit for my personality. But honestly, when I started college, I thought music education was the direction I was going to go. I had played piano for, gosh, at that point, probably 10 years, and was very active in the music ed programs of my high school, my church, and it seemed like a good fit. So I started my college years as a music education major. However, it didn't take me long to figure out at that time that in the world of teaching, there was one music teacher in a building, and I was looking at elementary. I'm not a very big person, and so I didn't see myself trying to corral high schoolers or middle schoolers, into behaving. And I honestly thought I'd be in elementary school for the duration of my career. But I looked at the typical school with one music teacher and 25 to 30 classroom teachers. And so after a year in the teacher education program and in the music education program, I decided to change my major to elementary ed with the thought that I could use music as a means of teaching, do a lot of integrating. I loved doing that. I did that for several years and, in fact, taught privately both piano and voice. So I got to fulfill my itch to be a music teacher as well. And when I taught overseas, I was the middle school choir director for the schools, so I got to do that as well, and that was fun. But when I entered my career in the early 1980s, um, teaching positions weren't like they are today. Uh, I think the year that I was hired in the school district where I started my career, I heard for every position that was open, there were like 123 applicants for every
Wow.
open position. It was competitive, it was hard. It was also a situation that it wasn't what you knew, but it was who you knew. And I happened to have a very connected, cooperating teacher who loved me
Oh, that's
and
nice.
connected me with a lot of the people that I needed to be connected with. And she really was so instrumental in helping me get that first job. So, great mentor, but also just somebody that was my advocate within the school district where I did my student teaching. And I was one of the lucky ones, and it truly was lucky. We were told as pre-service teachers, you probably should count on substitute teaching for a year or two.
Yeah.
And I never had to do that. So that was a blessing, a shock. I had just turned 21 years old, so I was, kind of very wet behind the ear, I guess. But anyway,
So you didn't stay in elementary education.
no, I didn't. I taught elementary ed for a total of 10 years. Enjoyed it very much. In fact, anytime I've ever taught at any level, elementary, middle, high school, college level, when I'm in the midst of it, I can't imagine doing anything else. And I love it. I loved when I did that. But when our kids started, my own personal family started coming along, I knew, well, a couple of things were at play. I poured a lot of myself into the classroom, and pre-family years when we were double income, no kids. Uh,
Yeah.
at that phase in our lives, we both spent a lot of time in the classroom. I was there late nights on the weekends, just pouring myself because I wanted to be the best teacher I could be. And it takes a lot of prep to do
Yeah, it
that.
does.
It takes a lot of time. And after our kids started coming along, I realized I can't be the mom I want to be and the teacher I want to be at the same time. And, after a lot of consideration and discussion, I decided I was going to step back from full time. I just initially planned on taking a leave of absence. But my former university supervisor, with whom I had stayed in touch all through the years. In fact, he had me come back to my alma mater to present at student teaching seminars. He was such a fantastic mentor to me and had me uh, serve on various committees with my alma mater. And when he found out that I wasn't planning on coming back, he contacted me and he said, "We would love to bring you on. And how can we make this fit around your schedule?" Which
Oh,
was,
wow.
I mean, it landed in my lap and I was kind of shocked because higher ed had always been something that was in the back of my mind. I might like to do that in my golden years. And, I wasn't even 30 yet when that had happened. And he he worked a schedule out so that I could teach in the evenings. When my kids started being part of like Mother's Day Out and preschool programs, we planned all of my classes to be at that time so that I could be at home, but at the same time, still very active in a career and developing in the world of higher ed,
Yeah.
which was, such a blessing because later on, a few years later, when I decided to go back and finish my doctoral program, um, the university that I was working with caught wind that I had actual teaching experience in higher ed and offered me an assistantship, a teaching assistantship that paid for my entire doctoral program
Oh,
if I
that's
would teach for
amazing.
them. And there are a lot of people that start doctoral programs that don't have that background
Yeah.
experience, but I had at that point had several years of higher ed experience and was able to move into higher ed classes for the university that I was getting my doctorate through, and taught for them for as long as my entire doctoral program. I taught for them, and they paid for it, which was great to finish the doctorate without having school debt hanging over my head.
Absolutely. What are you doing right now?
I am teaching at the middle school level. I'm a reading
Oh, wow.
specialist, and I teach middle schoolers. I teach kids that have been struggling readers and frustrated readers for many years, many of whom have given up. Probably the greatest challenge I have with my middle schoolers is to get them motivated.
Yeah.
They can learn, they're not beyond learning. Somewhere along the line, there's a hole. There's something that they missed along the line and in their elementary years. And I have to try to fill that hole. But in order to do that, I also have to get them motivated to want to do it, because by
Right.
middle school, they've experienced so much failure
Mm-hmm.
and they've self-labeled. I'm not a reader. I hate reading,
Yeah.
and it's sad to me. It is one of the biggest tragedies is for kids to get to that level and already count themselves out.
Yep. I have, as you know, I have a lot of experience at the middle school level. And one of the things
Mhm.
I've always said, because, usually if you tell people you teach at the middle school level, they say, "Oh, how do you do it?" I love that age group. But I also said, part of the problem is we don't always like ourselves that much when we're that age because we're still
Yeah,
figuring out who we are.
absolutely.
And nobody looks back at middle school and says, "Oh, that was the best time of my life," because nobody enjoys going through puberty, at least that I know of. Maybe there's people out there that do, but for the most part, the people in my unscientific survey typically do not enjoy that time in their life. So I think that when you have struggling learners that are also going through all of that, it's just a really challenging time for them.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And, I I find that a lot of kids want to act like they're cool and, being being smart isn't their goal, but I think down deep, they kind of like to be smart.
Oh, yeah.
I, I can take an example of a student in one of my eighth grade classes this year who started off for the first half of the year just wanting to play it dumb. It's cool, it's funny, I'm so dumb, and isn't that funny? And then he started dating a girl that I think expects him to be smart. And suddenly it matters to him and he's participating appropriately. And I've just seen just an overall just metamorphosis with him. He is really I'm going to take him aside before the end of the school year and say, "Whoa, I am so impressed with what you've done this year.
And
You've
that's
just
why
turned
we
it
do
around."
it. That's
Because
why we
I've
do
worked
it.
with him since he was, at the beginning of middle school. And now we're here at the end, and he's always played the goofy dumb guy. And suddenly he's not. And it's like, oh, the love of a good girl. Isn't that nice?
And I like that you called it a metamorphosis because that is really what it seems like a lot of times with those
Yes.
kiddos.
Yeah.
So, what would you say was your, if you can say, your favorite level that you've taught at?
Well, I mean, as I said before, when I'm in the middle of it, I love what I'm doing. I mean, I can honestly say 40 years into this crazy career, I still enjoy teaching. I still enjoy the teaching part. And there are aspects of each level that uh, make it so incredibly unique. And there's just an enjoyable element. And when you're teaching the young ones, they love you. and they want to please you. And seeing those wonderful light bulb moments where it's like, oh my goodness, I get it now. I mean, there's nothing like it. And I love teaching the littles for that reason. Um, as I move into middle school and high school, I'm now with middle school, but I've taught high school as well. There's something about just having those conversations. And I've even had kids come back and tell me, I love the conversations that we had in your class. And coming up with relevant examples. I'm trying to teach them something. And I guess when you've done it for 40 years, you can come up with a lot of examples if you can still remember them. But to talk about, here's an example of what I'm trying to describe here. And it just clicks with them. And you see the moment that it clicks. And I love that part. And I love having some of those grown-up conversations with kids, and the kids will come by or I'll get an email from them, a year or two down the road after I've had them. And I just remember when we did this in class, and I really enjoyed that. And so there's that element, with at the secondary level. In higher ed, with pre-service and in-service teachers, I love feeling that I have a part in those future classrooms. That
Yeah.
something that I'm trying to explain or something that I share, an idea for teaching, is actually going to get used. And I've had people email me saying, I tried this lesson that you demonstrated for us and it went so well. It's like, yeah, that's great. I love, I guess you can just say, knowing that no matter what level you're teaching, you can make an impact and you will leave a mark that's going to stay forever. That's what I think teachers do. I think of teachers that I had 40 and 50 years ago that are still impacting who I am as a teacher today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think that answered your question or gave you
No,
a
I
specific.
think it
There's
did.
just something really good about every level. And, if you stick around long enough, you're going to find it.
Yeah.
Just find out what is great with every level of kid or adult, as the case may be.
I think what you're saying is something that's encouraging to career teachers as well as people who genuinely are thinking about, going into the field, because there's a lot of negativity around the field right now, which we'll get to here in a minute. I have
Oh,
another
absolutely.
question that came up as you were talking, though. You do have this unique experience. However, we do come across this frequently,
Mhm.
that you are married to an educator. And I am curious, what does that look like for you? What are your thoughts on, I mean, you don't know any different, but you do have colleagues who are not married to educators. So what are some of the benefits and maybe not so great sides of both people being educators in the family?
Well, I think one of the benefits, I'm going to start with the benefits, is that we can talk shop and throw ideas out for each other. If I have, especially as I moved into this phase of my career where I'm working with middle schoolers, well, my husband has been with middle school for a lot longer. He has worked with middle schoolers. He gets the middle school level. I sometimes think he thinks like a middle schooler. There's that unique perspective. But, there are times when I'm in a quandary of what to do about this or that, and I can throw ideas. And he does the same with me, especially because my area of expertise is literacy.
Right.
And he has asked me for ideas on bringing more literacy lessons and strategies into his content area. And so we kind of help each other out that way. We've always enjoyed the schedule together,
Yeah.
having that time to enjoy together in the summer or over the holidays or whatever without having another job hanging over our heads. Um, I that part has always been nice. Um, okay, does that answer the
Yeah,
good
yeah,
part?
it does. I would
Yeah.
think too that you guys are, as a former teacher, I know that there were times that, like, you're going through that whole cycle together, right?
Yeah.
Like, as in
Well, and
August,
we've been in
as
our
you
careers pretty close. I've been teaching 1 year longer than he has.
yeah.
I mean, together we have taught 79 years when you think
Wow.
about that. It's like,
That's true.
wow.
That is true.
Hmm.
So, this podcast is a safe space for educators to talk about burnout and share our stories about what we're seeing that we believe is leading to this. What are your thoughts on teacher burnout? 40 years. Do you think it's teacher burnout is the same now as it was 40 years ago? Do you think
No,
it
no, I think reasons for burnout, which are very legitimate. Um, well, I can say this. I don't think I saw burnout 40
wow.
years ago like I'm seeing it today. I saw people that needed a change, maybe, but I shared this earlier. When I entered this career, I didn't enter it with the idea that I was going to do it for, 5 to 10 years and then go off to do something else. What I did realize in myself is I needed something fresh every 5 to 10 years. I needed to do something just a little different.
Right.
And just to re energize myself, because honestly, doing the same thing year in and year out, and God bless the teachers that do that, and get really good at it.
Yeah.
They decide they're going to be a third grade teacher and they do it for 25 years. And I could never do that. And I knew that about myself even early on. And so I taught first grade for 5 years and second grade for 5 years. And, I would, like I said, I go through a 5 to 10 year cycle where I have to change something up just to be fresh,
Right.
just to feel refreshed in what I do. I knew when I entered the career, it was a lifer. This is what I was going to do, is what I was meant to do. Now, who was I going to do it with? That's the part that changed over the
Right.
years. And so you know, every 5 to 10 years, I start looking at other possibilities, other opportunities. And it's not so much that I hate what I'm doing, but I just know for myself I need that challenge of learning something new. I need to be challenged to expand my knowledge, expand my arsenal of teaching strategies, whatever it is. And when I make the change, it's like, oh, I feel it again now. I feel that energy starting to build up. And I also see, that I've got new stuff to learn, whatever it
Yeah.
is in whatever area, whether it's the kids or so the teacher burnout factor, though, when I started teaching, I worked with a lot of people who were 25, 30, 35, 40-year veterans. A lot of people fell
Right.
into that category. Now, why did that happen? Well, I was working with a lot of baby boomers that were older baby boomers who, by the way, took all the jobs, which is why there weren't a lot of jobs when I entered, because I'm technically a baby boomer, but I'm on the very edge of the switching over to Gen X.
Yeah.
And so when I started my career, I was working with a lot of people who entered the career with the idea that it was lifer. That's how we did it.
Mhm.
That's how we did it back in the 70s and 80s. You started your career, that's what you were going to do.
Right.
And and some of the issues that people deal with today didn't exist then. When I when I began my career, I'd have my 24, 25, well, first graders to begin with. Well, there were things that needed to be done at home to support what I was doing in my classroom.
Right.
So if I sent home that list of sight words to practice on, guess what they did at home? They practiced their sight words. When I sent home notes saying we need this or we need that in the classroom, guess what came back? Whatever it was I asked for. And if I had to call mom or dad, but mostly mom, to say I'm having trouble with little Charlie, guess who really gave it to little Charlie when he got home? It was what happened at home was really almost always supportive of what was going on in the classroom.
Yeah.
And you were really seen as a partnership. You know, I'm looking back, and without going into a lot of detail, I can think of one time. I always look at my career in phases, and during that first phase, the elementary phase, I can think of one really tough parental situation where the child was being physically abused. And I had to call social rehabilitation services based on evidence that came
Right.
in that the coming from the child. And that mother was furious with me and
Yeah.
came in and was going to let me have it. And fortunately, at that time, the building that I was in was an open classroom, open concept classroom. We didn't have doors. And my coworker next door heard what was going on and came over and said, we need to go to the office, and didn't, because this lady
Yeah.
was angry. And yeah, we took it to the office at that point. But as I look at that face, that was the one really bad parent interaction I had for 10 years. And almost every other parent situation, for one thing, and people don't believe this today, but when we had parent teacher conferences, it was rare to not have 100% of your parents show up.
Yeah.
Now it's rare to see 100% of your parents.
Yeah.
And in my 40 years in the classroom, the number one change, people ask me this, and I said, it took me a while to kind of think about, oh my gosh, that's what it is. It's not the kids. Yeah, there are things about the kids that have changed, but kids are kids. It's their families that have changed. It's the way parents view their role in the process that
Yeah.
has changed. And that has created such a void of support that early in my career I had.
I'm always curious about why that is now because I agree. I even, I didn't start teaching until 2007, 2008. I was in education starting in 2001,
Mhm.
but I have seen this trend not going the way that we would like for it to. It's going the other way. It's less connection. And I don't know if that's related to technology, that everybody's less connected. I don't know if it's
Could
related to
be.
trust.
I'm going to say
Um,
something that's going to make people mad, but I think parents have abdicated their responsibilities. And I say that as a teacher of 40 years and somebody who raised 3 kids,
yeah,
that there is there is a responsibility. It is not the teacher's job
yeah.
to raise your kid. And I'm going to sound like a little old lady now, but it's not the teacher's job.
No, I think that maybe we all saw a little bit of that. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that the pandemic certainly opened all of our
Mhm.
eyes to a lot of things, even parents. As a parent myself, I all of a sudden was teaching from home and schooling my own child
Mhm.
simultaneously, and I really had to look at myself and see how removed I was from her education,
Yeah.
how I had not participated in some ways that perhaps I should have been. I also falsely assumed that everyone else would be having those epiphanies, but no, everyone else was like, woo, we're out completely. We're just not
That
going to
is
educate the kid.
that is exactly what at the beginning of the pandemic. And I honestly say I am so glad that I went through the pandemic as a classroom teacher because I would never have believed it otherwise. But
Yep.
I thought, okay, parents are going to finally see. They're going to finally see how important their role is. Nope, that's not what happened. If anything, they moved further away from it. And they gave the impression, so many, and I can say this is true of many of the families of the kids that I work with, that if anything, they move further away from seeing their responsibility. And the kids took it as this isn't important.
Well, I think it only takes a couple of generations of this. And
Mhm.
by generation, I mean when you have a parent that has been raised that way, they don't have the background knowledge or the skill set to maybe know how they need to develop that connection. I
Yeah,
do think you're right. When I was in school, I remember we always had a room mom.
right.
Um, and I thought when I started out teaching that all of those things still existed. My goodness, we had a hard time finding a PTO president every year.
Yeah, yeah,
Nobody wanted to do it. And I think that, there's probably tons of things we could attribute this to. When I was a kid, my mom stayed at home the first few years
mhm,
when we were younger. And I did the same with my own daughters. I was always involved in my older daughter's school. Once Camille was in school, I was, of course, I was working simultaneously, which is a whole thing that I think maybe we don't talk about when we are educator parents is that you sometimes do lose out on opportunities
yeah,
to share some of those really special moments with your kids because you're doing your own thing as a teacher. But
right.
I'm sure the fact that most families are both parents are working from the get-go now
Oh, that
has a
no doubt.
significant portion to play.
Mhm. A lot of stress is on families today, but it still can't be used as an excuse to abandon such important responsibilities.
Would you say you're seeing a lot of burnout in your current school?
Oh,
Who do
yes.
who do you think is burning out? I mean, is it an age group? Is it all teachers?
It's the younger teachers. In fact, I just right then thought about every teacher in the last 2 years since the pandemic who have left like pre-retirement. And the teachers that retired at the age where they should have retired.
Hmm.
They were lifers. It was time for retirement. But I've seen far more younger teachers leave, citing emotional health, you know, mental health concerns.
Yeah.
And these teachers had classroom management issues in almost every single case
Yeah.
of teachers that were leaving without having stayed in the field for 5 years or so. Their classrooms were a nightmare.
Do you think
I
that
get it. Who wants to be in that all
Well,
day
I was going
long?
to ask, do you think that's a significant change in your 40 years, the amount of behaviors and the types of
Oh yeah.
behaviors?
Yeah. Well, and the reason that those behaviors exist is because the kids know no one is going to call them on it. They're not going to be held accountable. In many cases, not held accountable by the administrator. Now, I will say right now, I feel that we have an administrative team who's taking it more seriously than a previous administrator was. Um, I just feel like if principals would get tougher sooner, because I've always felt like if you go around saying the next time, you're guaranteeing that there's going to be a next time. With my kids in my classroom, if I'm dealing with issues, I don't say the next time this happens, because I know when I say the next time that I'm giving them permission to have a next time,
Right.
and I don't want to do that.
I do think administrators I would not be an administrator. I can
Oh,
tell you
no.
that. They have a huge burden of responsibility because they're kind of sandwiched between kind of the superintendent and the state and then the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, they have a lot of power over how things go in a building. And I would say they have some power in terms of how quickly their teachers burn out.
Yeah, I think the lack of administrative support for behavioral issues really contributed to the number of teachers that, I mean, it just seemed like for a couple of years there was just sort of this revolving door going on. Sometimes I want to say to the teacher, toughen up
Yeah.
a bit.
Well, I think it takes 2 years easily
Oh,
for any
yeah.
new teacher because it doesn't matter who tells you. We tell them, don't, they're not your friends. Don't go
Yeah.
in
Yes.
expecting them to, you don't need them to like you. And boy, I haven't seen very many first year teachers that don't get caught up in that. And the
Hmm.
second year they say they're not going to, and they get caught up again. And I think it's really that third year that you're like, okay, I've had enough.
All right. Yes. Yeah, you're right. I mean, sure, everybody wants to have their students like them, but I don't need to have them like me.
Right.
And I think I try to create, and I tell them this, I'm going to respect who you are. I'm going to respect you as an individual, but I also expect that you'll respect me.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is a give and take kind of thing.
You also had mentioned feeling like admin's out of touch with the realities of the classroom.
It just feels like every couple of years, something new some new program or policy. The big one right now, and boy, PLC plus, and I went to summer training so I could be on the PLC plus leadership team. And I'm just looking at that saying, this is not anything new. And you're going to put us through hours and hours and hours of training when in fact, if you just set up, these are the guidelines for how these groups are going to work together. I don't look at what I've seen in this PLC plus training that's going on right now. And prior to that, it was MTSS training. And every few years, something new is coming out, and we spend hours getting trained. And then it didn't work exactly like we wanted it to. Off to the next thing. And I just feel that if we would give teachers that valuable time that we spend training on this program or that program, and tell teachers, this is time for planning. This is time for you to learn something new, to try something. And you know what? Get together with another teacher that has it together in the classroom and get ideas from each other.
I remember when MTSS was the umbrella, and I think that it's just taking us little by little, layer by layer, away from what the issues are. The issues are
Exactly.
behavior, the issues are kids can't do math, the issues are kids can't read, and the issues are
Right.
kids can't write. Those are the issues. Let's stop labeling it. Don't give me 3 tiers of support that I need to figure out where my kid's at. You know what I mean? Give us time to teach what we know works. If we take away the computers and we take away the cell phones and we take away the whiteboards and we take away all of that and we give them books, every teacher I know knows how to sit with kids, read, and ask them higher level questions.
Right.
Every teacher I know knows the basic grammar and punctuation rules, and every
Mhm.
teacher I know knows how to teach the basics of math. Why are we spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in
Absolutely.
education on all of these different curriculum programs and technology? Because it's all about the money. It makes me
Right.
so mad.
Yeah. No, it's going back to MTSS, and really my first few years back in the K-12 world, I got all the MTSS training. And the whole time I'm thinking, as we tier these kids, it really allows the teacher to become less and less connected with each child as an individual, because now we're just grouping. And guess what? Those tier 3 kids, let's send them off to the specialist. Now, as an early in my career, there wasn't any tier 3ing.
Mhm.
Guess what? I had tier 1, 2, and 3 all in the same class. And I knew exactly where every kid was.
That's
And I
right.
taught exactly what every kid needed in my class. I didn't send them off to the specialist.
It's a skill set that we have as teachers. Maybe we don't have it honed our first couple of years, but maybe if you gave us time to do it and some trust to do it, rather
Right.
than telling us that this one way is how everybody has to do it, um, and give us some anonymity and trust us, I think that would be a game changer. And the part that really pisses me off is that test scores haven't changed.
Right.
They're
Right.
not
It
going up.
hasn't improved anything.
Okay.
But we've spent a lot of money
Yes, we have.
thinking
And
it's going to
time.
improve. Yes. And time. We have early release once a week so we can get our PLC plus training in. And the whole time I'm thinking, I really need to be in my classroom. I can only cringe at how much money my district has put out in MTSS training and PLC plus training. And let's take that money and put it into the teacher salary pool. I,
Well,
because
and
honestly, and I think I mentioned this on your questions, you know, how can we improve? Well, I can tell you after doing this for 40 years, my salary is pretty pitiful. And
yep.
it feels like a slap in the face. You know, when I left higher ed a few years ago to come back to the classroom, because that's where I really felt like my heart was, and I really missed being with real kids. I also felt like as an instructor in higher ed that you lose your relevancy after a while. And at that point, I had been out of the K-12 setting for 15 years. And I truly was starting to feel I do not have a relevant frame of reference to even address some of the issues that I was hearing from. And as I'd go into classrooms to supervise student teachers, I would see things happening and I would see things and realize I really, if I'm going to stay relevant in my field, I need to be back here seeing what's happening. And so, yeah, you know, that relevancy. But in order to go back to the classroom, I took a huge cut when I left higher ed to come back to, I lost $20,000
Wow.
because they wouldn't pay me for my higher ed experience.
Wow.
They gave me credit for my K-12 experience, but no, we're not going to pay for higher ed. And it's like, but I was in a state approved licensure program, fully accredited program. And yeah, that bothers me. That bothers me that the experience and the fact that I come in doctorally prepared, you know, they didn't want to pay for it.
Yeah. I would say that's something that comes up over and over again
Hmm.
is I teachers don't feel valued. Actually, I keep
Right.
saying teachers, but it's educators. Educators do not feel valued.
No,
And a lot of that comes through compensation. Whether
that's
it is,
exactly, they'll pay for what they value
yes.
and they won't pay teachers.
Yeah. So I think we're ready for our 3 for the road.
Okay.
And number 1 is What is one thing you would change immediately in education? Only one, if you could. It's a magic wand. Anything you want, go.
The requirement that every parent stay connected to what's happening in the classroom.
I've seen this work in one building, um, not so much like involved with the homework piece, but the behavior
Mhm.
piece,
Yes,
where there was
whatever the
a
connection
level.
needs to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think that I wouldn't even say just parent connection, but cultural connection to
Oh
those
yeah.
kids and what's going on.
Well,
Those
the culture
community.
that supports the idea that parents need to be involved.
Yeah,
And we don't have a culture right now that supports that idea.
I agree.
Parents are given a pass and yeah, and their kids aren't benefiting from it.
Okay, number two, because of the nature of what we do, we witness tragedy frequently. Sometimes we're a part of it. Sometimes we get the secondary trauma or the firsthand trauma. Tell me about one of the most traumatic or tragic things that you've witnessed directly due to you being an educator. And it's an important question because so many people are out there in the trenches and they need to know they're not alone. But I want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about to your comfort level.
All right, here's something. I'm going to talk about a culture, and this is a peer culture within the K-12 setting. This is true in higher ed as well. I saw it happen in higher ed, where teachers, maybe because of burnout, but are being less supportive of each other. And, I mentioned earlier that I see a lot of younger teachers really succumbing to burnout and leaving their careers.
I have seen this in other buildings as well. And
And
I think it's
to me,
important to
that's
mention.
tragic because somebody who could have been a good teacher, but was, because these are teachers that they've been doing it for 10 or 15 years, they're going to be there for a while, but they love their comfort group and they wouldn't even dream of trying to reach out
Yeah.
to the younger teachers who need that help.
You
And all
know,
they do is complain about that teacher doesn't have any control over their classroom.
I think
And
that,
I'm the little old lady who comes in and says, "What can I do to help?" And of course, they want to put on the brave face. Well, and in a lot of cases, I don't have in my arsenal how to teach a biology lesson. But guess what? The biology teacher on the next hall does,
right.
but they won't come alongside. And I think we're kicking ourselves and really hurting ourselves by not being a more inclusive community. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I've seen some instances of that where the tragedy is that teachers aren't being their own best resources, with each other.
And we are a community. And most teachers teach wholeheartedly. It is a huge
Hmm.
portion of your life. So if you're having that year that you have the class that is just,
Hmm.
creating trauma for you every day
Right.
and then you add the trauma of feeling like you're not accepted by your peer group.
Exactly.
That's huge. That is
And I've
huge.
seen that happen now in more than a handful of instances. And I call them the middle-aged mean girls
Yeah.
because they've just got this hard shell that we're part of a group and you're not one of us.
And
I don't even.
honestly, women like you and I don't get targeted for that because they know I'm very outspoken. You're very outspoken. It's always the people who don't have a strong voice that get targeted for that kind of thing. I just think that's such an ugly facet of
Yeah.
human behavior. To balance out the trauma, kids are pretty funny. What's one of the funniest things you've experienced during your time as an educator?
I do remember a story when I was teaching second grade. Now, the building I was teaching in was a new building built on the very edge of the prairie. And so we often had interesting encounters with creatures in that building. And unbeknownst to me, there was a new creature coming off the field next to the playground that I didn't know anything about. And my second graders came in from recess, and one of my students showed me these cute little frogs. And I said, "Oh, that's really cute. Probably ought to let him out. It's not really nice to keep him in the classroom, and he needs to be out jumping around outside." Well, Brian has some. And I looked over at Brian, and Brian said, looked at me like, "What is she talking about?" And somebody said, "Check his socks."
Oh my.
So I walked over and I said, "Brian, pull up your pants." So he pulled up his pant legs, and there were big lumps
Oh.
in his socks. And I said, "Pull down your socks." And he did. And two frogs jumped out of his socks.
Oh my gosh.
That was too cute. I still remember looking at him like, number one, you lied. But number two, that was as funny as anything to see those frogs jump out of your socks, and you're gonna keep those poor frogs just captured within your socks all day long. So I feel good about the fact that I saved the frogs,
Yes, you did.
Brian's socks, but that
You
was
did.
that was something that was cute.
You did your part for the animal community that day. You
Yes.
saved 3 lives.
Yes, I did.
Okay. I have one final question for you.
Okay.
You go into the staff room and there are dishes. Sorry. You go into the staff room. You need to get some water. And there are dishes, dirty dishes in the sink to the point that you can't get your water.
Mm,
Whose responsibility is it to do those dishes?
That's a good question. Here's here's what I would do. I would probably wash the dishes, put them on a towel next to the sink, and be really pissed off
Would you send an
because
email?
yet again, I have to be somebody's mother. I might even put a note up and say, "I am not your mother. Why did you leave dirty dishes in the sink?" I probably would do something like that because, for one thing, I can't stand to see dirty dishes, not in my own sink at home, and certainly not there. I would try to figure out, okay, why would somebody do this? Maybe they forgot, maybe, but it would make me upset, but I'd still wash them.
Aw.
And then I would put up a note saying, "I'm not your mother. Clean your dishes the next time."
Like I said, nasty email. I was really good at those. By the
I
way,
probably would put my name and say, "Be sure to come by and thank me." Yeah.
is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we say goodbye today?
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, there's an element to this that's therapeutic because, I don't know that I've said to anybody in my building, I really hate PLC Plus and MTSS. And gosh, it's totally getting us off track with what's really important. But if I said that, they'd look at me like, "Don't say that, it's a dirty word." But
Yeah, it's
yeah,
cleansing for the soul, though,
it
to speak your
sometimes
truth.
it sometimes is. Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on, and I've enjoyed having you. Thanks.
It's been nice to visit again.
I wish I knew.
Before I sign off, I want to say if you liked today's episode, and since you're still with me, I'll assume you did, be sure to check out my 3-part series featuring Kelly on special education teacher burnout. Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez.
But I'm so frustrated.
If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFore. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.